Hello, everyone. I'm Medhi. I'm organizer of the SKC Science and Technology webinar series that we started a little over a year ago online. It's open for anyone to participate. And I'm helped by a small team of volunteers, Manoj Monkolita, Uddipana Goswami, and Manavendra Sohoria. Today, it's my pleasure to have Indrani Medhi Thies as a webinar speaker in our fireside chat format. Indrani has accomplished a lot, and I have watched her do a lot of work over the last 15 years or so. And she works as a principal researcher at Microsoft India, currently based in the US. And she has many awards, including the MIT Technology Reviews 35 under 35. I think that's what I got it right, and marked as the 50 smartest people in technology by Fortune. So there are a lot of accomplishments she has done, but it will be interesting because of what she has done, especially for people who are low literate user or illiterate, and she has done a lot of field work to get to where she is. So with that, I'll hand it off to Indrani to talk through it, and of course she's going to use some slides, and I'm going to quote unquote interrupt her and ask questions and clarification. Okay. So with that, I can see your slide. You are in a good setting, and give me 1 second. I want to go to the speaker mode for you. So, okay, just okay, go ahead, please. Yep.
Thank you so much for the opportunity, Deepta, and thank you all for joining, especially taking the time on a Saturday evening in India. So I'm very excited to be speaking to you today. I have spent the past decade and a half doing design work in information communication technologies for low literate, low income users. So today I'll talk about some of our research from over the years and share broader field deployments from our lab, and also conclude with lessons learned in designing technologies for social impact for these low income, low literate communities. So actually I'm trying to proceed with my slide, but it's not going to the next slide. Interesting.
Okay, all right.
Maybe I need slide control or something.
You should have the control. Do you want to turn it? I mean, try it again by just kind of closing it and opening it.
Yeah, sure.
The presentation. Okay.
Let me see. Okay, let me try that again. I'm sorry. So. Yeah, it's not, sorry, it's, I don't know what's happening.
Interesting. I don't know why it is happening. So I did not think about the issue with the.
Okay, so I think, okay, now it's working.
Yeah, okay,
now it's
very
working.
Good. Great, yeah. Thank you. Okay.
Okay, thank you. Sorry about the interruption. So, so I joined Microsoft Research India in Bangalore right after my master's. So I did the master's in design from the Illinois Institute of Design in Chicago. So that time Microsoft Research was starting a new lab in India, in Bangalore. So I was just finishing up and I interviewed, and I have been with the group ever since. So before, doing my master's, I had done a bachelor's in architecture from NIT Nagpur, and my higher secondary was in science from Cotton College, and I did my high school from St. Mary's, Guwahati. So while at Microsoft Research, I did a PhD in interaction design from the Industrial Design Center at IIT Bombay. And this was while working. So, I would go between, Bangalore, where I was based, and then I would go to Bombay, do my coursework and, do all project meetings. So it was a exciting phase of life. So the question that we ask in this work is, how do we create user interfaces such that any person who is not literate can, on first interaction with a computer or a mobile phone, extract information that's relevant for his or her life with minimal or no external assistance. So that's the research question. So in terms of methodology, we've been conducting a lot of ethnographic interviews. So I spend a lot of time in the field, doing one-on-one interviews, group interviews, do immersive observations in the field. So it's been a very participatory design process where we involve the end user in the design process. So we might, give them tools to kind of play around with to help us generate ideas for these interfaces. It's also been a very iterative design process in the sense that, I start with field work, come back to the lab, bring an understanding from the field and, design prototypes. And then once the prototypes are ready, go back to the field and test them with potential users, and then take their feedback and roll that feedback into the next iteration. And
So quick
we've
question
done,
here for you.
yeah, sure. Yeah,
How did you get interested in that to
the
start
space.
with? Yeah. So.
Yeah, that's a great question. So during my school days, I was very interested in art, and
Mhm.
on weekends I would go to art school. So all throughout this, I went to Assam Fine Arts and Crafts Society, uh,
Okay.
Judges Field, Guwahati. So I had, while academically I was good, I think I was good, but I was also very deeply interested in arts, and
Mhm.
I think that uh, uh, kind of stayed with me. And when I went to design school, I started doing a lot of projects for, designing for the bottom of the pyramid. At that time it was called,
I
design for
see.
social impact. So
Mhm.
I come from a family where, people are like educationists, legislators. My grandparents were very involved in India's freedom movement. So I always knew that I wanted to do societal impact work. So
Mhm.
this, thing of like wanting to do societal impact work, but also, doing it through, my background in fine arts. So, and then like using technology to do that. I think everything came together. So I don't
Okay,
know if
very
that
good.
answers your
Okay.
question.
Mhm. Sure. Yeah.
Yeah. So we've done very controlled usability studies where, basically design and a system, design an interface, and then bring people in and, test the interface, so basically like give usability tasks to people, see how they're able to, use these interfaces and what are the problems in the interface that we should fix, things like that. So over the past several years, I've spent hundreds of hours in the field, across rural and urban locations in India, the Philippines, and South Africa. And these are pictures from the field where I'm maybe interviewing people or doing user testing.
So
So
I understand the field work in India. What led you to pick South Africa or Philippines?
mm,
Is there something
mhm.
specific you wanted to understand for low
Yeah,
literate people in those areas?
yeah, no, that's a great question. So we were looking at mobile money. This was collaborative work with the World Bank, CGAP, the consultative group to assist the poor, with World Bank. And that time, mobile money was starting to get very popular.
Mhm.
So some of you might have heard of M-Pesa in Kenya. So basically, I mean, mobile money is for people who are unbanked. So because you don't have a bank account, you do phone-to-phone transfer of virtual money, and then
Mm-hmm.
you can do cash in, cash out at physical locations, which could be your neighborhood grocery store. So at that time, because of various regulatory policies, India did not have mobile money. Though I know now there are increasingly some services that look into that, but Philippines and South Africa had like a flourishing mobile money economy, and that's what we were trying to understand. So there was Gcash in the Philippines and Visit in South Africa, and we were trying to understand, how do people use it? What's the ecosystem? What are the
Mm-hmm.
various kind of channels to transfer money among the low-income populations, and like, are they using mobile money for virtual cash transfers? So yeah.
Okay. Okay. Very interesting. Okay. Mm-hmm.
And it was interesting to like compare and contrast the cultural differences or similarities across these different
Sure.
populations and
Yep.
different
Mm-hmm.
geographies.
Right.
So in terms of characteristics of the communities that we studied, people had informal sector jobs. So they could be, domestic helpers, people who cook and clean at other people's homes. They could be, construction workers, daily wage earners, fishermen, farmers, and so on. Household incomes typically less than, let's say, 11,000 rupees per month. There's less levels of formal education, highest grade attained at maybe eighth grade, sometimes much lesser as well. Um, there was a mix of people who used or did not use mobile phones. Although increasingly in the last 2 years, we've started seeing, more and more low-end smartphones that are becoming popular in these communities.
Mm-hmm.
But across the board, people had, very little experience using computers, though there were other technologies at people's homes, like, television sets, DVD players, and so on. And like many of us know, and it is obvious to people in South Asia, I think, I mean, we speak a lot of languages, right? Like sometimes up to like 3, 4 local languages, but there was little English. So these were kind of the characteristics of the communities that we looked at. So in terms of what application areas, so I already mentioned mobile money transfer, where you could do virtual cash transfer and cash in, cash out at physical locations. But one of the first application areas was a job information system for domestic helpers. So imagine something like monster.com, but for the informal labor market. So, middle class employers,
Mm-hmm.
let's say, could insert their requirements of a helper through their home computer. On the other end, there was, let's say, there are domestic helpers who are looking for jobs. They can look up that information at a nonprofit kiosk or on their phone and get information about potential jobs. So there's also health information dissemination that we've looked at. We saw that at many government hospitals in India, there are very long queues. People are waiting to see the doctor because the doctor-patient ratio is skewed. So while people are waiting, how can we meaningfully, disseminate health information
Mm-hmm.
to these patients? Then there's like, how can you design maps which are text-free, where there's no text, for people who cannot read or write? There's also agriculture video search that we've looked at. So imagine something like YouTube, but where you don't have to type to see a video. You can either use local language speech or graphical input to, throw up agriculture videos. And this is for low literate farmers. And we also looked at, social networking for farmers. So some of the applications that we've looked at. So, so what is the problem with non-literacy? So when we started, we had a very kind of like narrow definition or understanding of non-literacy. We thought that non-literacy is the inability to read text.
Mm-hmm.
So, to kind of overcome that, we designed these interfaces where, we used a combination of graphics, video, audio output. We kind of removed all text because seeing text was intimidating to users. But we kept numbers in our UI. I think someone has a question. saw a hand going up. Is there a question?
No, I didn't see anything.
Okay.
So, okay.
Okay. All right. So yeah, so there are numbers in our UI because people who are low literate are very good with numbers. So, to kind of
Mhm.
depict wages, let's say we have numbers in these interfaces. Okay. So
Okay, yeah.
yeah.
Go ahead. Yep. Mhm.
So okay, so we're not doing any text, but we're going to use graphics and imagery. So I think the first question as researchers is like, what is the optimal visual representation even within graphics? So to answer that question, we did a control study with 200 people from urban slum communities in Bangalore, where we compared 10 different representation styles. So there was a local language text. This is in Kannada, which says Bhari Jwara, which means high fever. Then there is static hand-drawn representations that we compared. So in this case, I'm showing you the example of somebody who has fever. And there is, somebody lying down and a caretaker is putting a cold compress on the forehead of this person with fever. We had photographs to depict the same thing, animation to depict, let's say high fever. And these are key frames of the animation. And finally, we had a video. So we did a comparison, like these conditions, both with and without audio output in the local language. So when we did this 200 people study, it was surprising. We saw that static hand-drawn representation with audio output was the most well understood among all these representation styles. So it turns out that, static hand-drawn representation has like the right amount of realism and abstraction. Photograph has too many details. People tend to kind of like get lost in the details. Sometimes
Interesting.
very abstract graphics have they're too abstract to understand. Something like animation or video, like motion graphics can be confusing because there is like a context laying activity, like, somebody dipping the cloth and wringing the cold compress and putting it on the forehead of the person who's sick. So, I mean, that context laying action can be confusing, but static hand-on representation turns out had the right amount of information to depict what we were trying to communicate. So that was the most well understood. So we
Okay.
also had to pay attention to a lot of subtle graphical cues, because people's understanding of graphics depended on various like psychological, cultural, or language biases that they had. So initially, to kind of depict the activity of washing dishes, like, right? So we had this symbol, which was some dishes put out, but when we showed it to people, they thought it was just like dishes, or like a room where dishes are put. So with that feedback, we put an action cue of like running water. So we just, with a little kind of subtle change, just introducing an action cue, it kind of fixed the issue, and people started understanding that, oh, it is the action of washing dishes. Then there were like cultural biases, for example, to when we were trying to show the address of the employer in the job information app, we had this symbol of a slope-roof house, which, in design schools or art programs, you're taught is the universal symbol of a house. But when we showed it to low literate users, low income domestic helpers, they said that their employers lived in tall apartment complexes. So with that feedback, we designed this particular icon. Yeah. And and also, like, there were sun and moon clocks which we used to denote job timing. So this was supposed to be 5:30 to 7, but some of our Muslim test participants, probably because Urdu is written from right to left, they were reading it in the other direction. So to kind of fix that, we introduced a direct, an arrow showing directionality. So
I
lots of such.
remember reading about that in one of your
Okay.
papers.
Okay, cool. Okay, that's great to know. So yeah, so like lots of very subtle things that can make a big difference in how people kind of like perceive or understand these things. So yeah, like I think mentioned earlier, people are low literate, but they're able to read numbers. So we have numbers in our UI. So there's, wages, or here in this particular graphic, it's like electricity bill of 700 rupees. So yeah, so there are numbers in the interfaces. So we saw that just the graphic by
One
itself is
question
not
about
enough.
numbers is
Yeah,
that
yeah.
uh, what did you find out in terms of whether the numbers need to be in Roman numbers, or the
Mm-hmm.
Arabic numbers,
Yeah,
or the
yeah.
native language? Did you have a
Yeah.
sense of what worked well there?
Yeah, no, that's a good question. So we saw that people already knew the Indo-Arabic numerals, the 0, 1, 2, 3.
Okay, very
So
good.
we did not test local language numbers, but I think there is reason to believe that in rural context, local language would be more useful, but we haven't tested
Okay, okay.
that. So we saw that just the graphic by itself was not information, what was not enough. So especially for like complex information, like farming, let's say. So the graphic had to be accompanied by voice output explaining what that graphic was. So especially for more complex domains, we had to do that. So now the question is, are low literate users able to use these interfaces? So we did controlled studies. We saw that, compared to, traditional interfaces, our interfaces require less assistance, but they were not sufficient to let people, proceed independently using these interfaces. So once we saw this in usability studies, we kind of went back and, re-looked at the problem, and
Mhm.
we asked, what is the problem with, designing for low literacy? So through a lot of immersion in the field, we realized that, uh, it was low textual literacy was beyond the strict inability to read text. Now, just to give more context, one thing to keep in mind, is that people who are low literate often have low levels of formal education. So many of these individuals have never been to school. Even if they did attend school, it was typically in a low resource classroom like this one, where not every student receives individual attention, and often falls far behind grade level. And while the lack of textual literacy is one of the most visible symptoms of lack of education, there are these other kind of like cognitive processes which come from formal education. For example, the ability to do abstraction, or the ability to understand hierarchies, or the ability to take instructions, or pay
Mhm.
attention to detail in general. So it
Mhm.
turns out that all of these things trace back to years of formal education. And if you're not educated, not only do you lack textual literacy, but your cognitive abilities might also be different. So you might lack some of these kind of cognitive processes which are required to navigate technological interfaces designed by people like you and me. So
Mhm. Got
so
it.
as a
Yeah.
next step,
Mhm.
we had to not just remove text in our interfaces, but really design for the cognitive abilities of people who have not been to school. So one thing that we saw was that people kind of lacked confidence while interacting with technology. They required frequent reassuring, or they required prompting, and so on. So we have like a consistent help icon across all screens, which is an icon with audio prompts on what to do, where to go, etc. um, then we also saw that uh, there's this intimidation because of maybe one's social standing. Sometimes when you take like a shiny piece of technology to the field, older users especially are intimidated that they might kind of break the device, and and they would be very conscious. So touching the device might be scary. So we thought, if touching the device is intimidating, how about experiment with local language speech input, which
Mhm.
possibly is more natural, right?
Uh,
So that's another kind of modality that we explored. One thing that we notice in these communities is the use or the presence of intermediated use. So people typically use technologies you would have seen with help from friends and family. And so one of our previous interns, Nitya Sambasivan, who's currently a researcher at Google, she had done this study where she looked at different types of intermediation. Sometimes, the beneficiary user might not even have direct contact with the technology. Sometimes, the beneficiary user might have access to a technology, but might not have the technological skills to, do an interaction. In some cases, they might have access to technology, they might have some technological skills, but may still require translation. So I think these are kind of different kinds of intermediation have implications for, interesting implications for design. For example, how do you manage privacy, and how do you kind of like design separate layers for the intermediary user and the beneficiary user? And once the intermediary user who's helping you, once they walk away with the technology, how do you enable 24/7 access to the beneficiary user? So lots of interesting
So
design
are you,
implications.
again, I have a question here. When
Yeah,
you
yeah.
think about the intermediary user, are you
Mhm.
expecting that person to be a bit more literate necessarily, or that's
Yes.
not that's an assumption in your way of looking
No,
at it?
so we have seen that usually, like recently we were doing some interviews of low and smartphone use. Typically
Mhm.
the intermediary user is from the same community, but
Mm.
has more literacy, maybe is a younger
Yep.
person,
In the old days, it
has
is
more tech
the person who
literacy.
wrote the letters for the for the
Right,
communities,
yeah,
right?
similar,
That's what
yeah,
it
yeah.
is. Yeah, exactly.
That's a good metaphor, yes,
Mhm.
definitely.
Mhm.
Yeah, so it's usually a younger, more literate, more tech literate person, yeah.
Mhm. Okay.
So also, uh, people are we saw that people have this kind of lack of awareness of what a computer could deliver. And just like they might not have an understanding of how information that's relevant to their life is contained in a computer. So uh, initially we had for the job information system, right, we had this instructional video of how to use the application. It was an over-the-shoulder shot of somebody using the system, and
Mm.
the instructional demo explained what you should do, where you should go, etc. So that was the demo, and we would show it to people and ask them to kind of use the application to find a job. But people were still like unsure, like how do I apply this, and where is this information coming from? So we went back, and we at that time we were spending a lot of time in the community. We saw that people were very fond of like watching TV serials, or like TV soaps as they call them here. So
Mhm.
women would get together in the evening and discuss what happened in this today's episode of the TV serial and so on. So we took that idea basically. We said, how about we wrap this instructional demo in a narrative? We have like a story around it to explain the broader context of the application. So in the job search app, um, in addition to the instructional demo, there is a narrative. There's like a story around it, and these actors are my colleagues from my lab. So
Okay.
the story in this case, in the job information system context, it is middle class employers are looking for a domestic helper. They insert their requirements through a home computer. On the other side, there is this domestic helper who is looking for a job. She's kind of like upset that she doesn't have a job for a long time. So along comes this nonprofit worker who says that, come, I'll take you to our office. There's this great system that you can use, and you can maybe find a job that you like. So they both go to the nonprofit office, and they look up information, and then the helper finds a job that she really likes, and then she goes to the home of this employer, and then potential employer, and then she lands the job. So this whole story, this narrative kind of
Mhm.
helped at many levels. One was just to understand the broader context of the application. Where was information coming in from? Where, and like how would it be useful? It also helped uh, helpers, who were watching this, kind of identify with a peer, right? This helper in the video who's like them, who benefited from using the system. So it helped at many levels. So
Hmm.
yeah, we call this the full context video.
Okay, very interesting. Okay, is it?
Thank
I
you.
presume this will be more easier on a PC or like a tablet type device nowadays than
It's
a mobile phone,
it's
right? Or does it
yeah,
work in a
actually.
mobile phone pretty well
mm,
also?
So the thing is, yeah, you're right. I think PC and tablet screen size is larger, though,
Hmm.
we find people watching like full length movies on
That's
these
true.
small
That's right.
devices.
Yep.
So,
Yeah.
and I'll come to that in a bit. There's this
Yeah.
entire
No, no,
economy
that's
around,
very interesting. I've been
Mm,
collecting data on my webinar series. 99%
mm,
of them use the mobile phone to watch the
right,
webinar.
right. So
So,
yeah,
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 so
even
very
like
interesting.
small screens, yeah,
Hmm.
people
Hmm.
are, watching these full
Okay,
length
that's true.
features. So
Okay.
yeah. So yeah, we saw that people generally had difficulty navigating hierarchical information architectures. So as much as possible, we try to have like linear navigation, go from one page to another, minimizing hierarchy.
That's very
Um,
interesting. The hierarchy. Yeah,
yeah,
that's what you said about the educational aspect about earlier
yes, yes, and
that that you don't
mhm,
realize about. I mean, you might understand
yeah,
hierarchy in the society, but not in the context of these images
yeah.
or sequence of images. Very interesting. Okay.
Right, right. So
Mhm.
this was a part of my PhD actually. So it's
Okay.
very interesting. We had done some control tests where we were comparing, different levels of hierarchies and so on. So yeah. Um, so also just we saw that there was difficulty transferring learning from watching a video and applying it to actual practice. So for example, if you watch the video of how to do vacuum cleaning,
Hmm.
uh, you know, um, mm, as like a domestic help skills training video, and you have to apply it to practice. If you had like an unfamiliar model, a model that is different from the one you saw in the video, people had trouble kind of generalizing or abstracting it to a different kind of model. So we suggest, videos should demonstrate examples as close as possible to the actual thing of use. So that's another thing that we saw. Um, so, so far I have talked about how to display and organize informational interfaces, but what about user input? How do we design for that? So one question that we explored was, can speech interfaces enable people who are low literate to easily look up information? So I may have briefly mentioned this earlier. We designed this system. We call it Video Kitty. It is a multimodal video search application to look up agriculture videos. So imagine something like YouTube, but you can look up videos without having to type. You can just like choose a video, like a graphic, or use local language speech. In addition to local language speech, the graphics were, static hand-drawn images like we had previously seen, uh, which you could select by touch input. Every graphic had an audio output in the local language. There was no text. We used numbers, and there was a consistent help icon across all screens. So we tested this with 20 users in rural Madhya Pradesh. Um, and this is what we see. So we see that even when speech recognition succeeded, there were challenges in the end-to-end interaction. So speech interface was not able to help low literate participants as much as relatively more literate participants from the same community. So
I see.
twice the number of attempts were
Hmm.
rejected for people who were low literate.
Hmm.
The one of the issues we saw while doing this testing in the field was that people did not know when to start speaking, and maybe they would stop, and they would say a few
Okay.
extra words.
Hmm.
So it was the system was not designed for free form speech. Like for example, you could not say, oh, I feel like watching a video on tomato. You had to say very like specific terms. You had to say like
Right, right, right.
tomato or like
Yeah,
germination or
it's not
harvesting.
AI intelligent in that sense, right? So,
Yes, right. So,
exactly.
I mean, free form speech would be great, but
Right.
local language free, like, free form speech is difficult to design. So the the vocabulary and the terminology that was complicated, there people would kind of, like stop, start, and that interaction would break down. The system would not recognize. For example, we had this term, chemical weedicide application, and we were working with these agriculture experts, and they said that chemical weedicide application is रासायनिक तरीके से खरपतवार नियंत्रण, which is like a very complex
Yeah,
Sanskritized term, right? Is
I
saying
see.
that even like for educated people would be difficult. So if you kind of like missed it, and the speech system would break down and people would feel nervous. We saw that speech worked where the user input was short, familiar words. Like, for example,
Hmm.
if you had to say
Hmm.
tomato, gehu, makka, like this was in Hindi. That's why I'm
So,
using these terms.
right.
Central.
Do you see that being different from one community to another? This kind of, I don't know if you did the control
Mm.
study in that regard.
Yeah,
I
no,
know it's
that's very interesting. So these studies were done in Madhya Pradesh. I
right.
think now we are doing uh, interviews, understanding how do people do voice search,
Hmm.
and we are trying to do interviews across India. So similar things come up across regions, which is
Okay.
interesting.
Hmm.
And like, for example, people usually don't know what word to say, so it throws up relevant videos. And there's also, it's not just I mean, there are, so I would say there's similarities across regions.
Hmm.
But there are differences in terms of gender. For example, we saw that women use speech less. This was in a rural context, right?
Very
A lot of the
interesting. Of
women
course, yeah.
women were yeah women were shy to speak. And
Mm.
like, it was not considered polite for a woman to speak loudly, especially in rural context. And they, maybe the father-in-law, the brother-in-law was in the next room, and they would like
Mm.
speak in a very hushed tone. And the system would not recognize, and
I see.
the
Okay.
the interaction would break down. So I would say like similarities across regions, but differences in gender and
That
literacy.
gender is
So
a very important difference. I didn't think about it. Yeah,
yeah.
very interesting.
Yeah, it was very interesting for us as well, just to see all these things in the field. So we realized how important it is to kind of immerse yourself in the field. Um, so anyways, so I would say that, like, initially when we set out, we thought, designing,
Mhm.
we had to design for the inability to read text, and textual non-literacy was the inability to read text. But, through immersion in the field, we realized that uh, non-literacy was actually correlated with these other multiple factors which had to be taken into consideration while designing interfaces for low literate, low income communities. So anyways, I just wanted to kind of, talk about some of the field deployments
Mhm. Mhm.
from our lab. So a lot of the research that we do in our group, went on to inform these three different organizations, which started off as research projects in the lab, but they were spun out as independent organizations. So Baba Job is a employment portal which
Mhm.
connects employers with potential employees in the informal sector for jobs like cooking, cleaning, driver, nanny, etc. So Baba Job was actually acquired by Quicker. It was in Baba Job, I think they realized that it was not just enough to put a technology, between employers and employees, but you have to design around, informal social networks, trusted intermediaries, and also take into consideration the literacy levels of users. So that's Baba Job. Then Digital Green is a development organization that does targeted agricultural information dissemination for low literate farmers. So basically, these are videos of local farmers adopting agricultural practices. And these videos of local farmers are shown to groups of farmers of like 12, 15 farmers sitting around, watching this, movie on a handheld projector. And there is a mediator, there's an agriculture mediator who shows these videos. So the mediator is typically from the village, and it's easier for people to kind of connect with the farmer in the video and the mediator who's from their community. And every few minutes the video, it's a short video, and every few minutes the video is stopped, and there's conversations, and it's a much more effective way of doing agriculture information dissemination than the traditional ways of agriculture information dissemination. So okay, so that's digital green. And then there is Everwell. So Everwell is a platform for medication adherence and patient management. So when patients dispense this medicine, they say a unique number behind the blister pack, and they have to give a missed call to this number. And the software tracks whether you've been taking your medicine. And if you don't take your medicine, uh, uh, you get a phone call from a government health worker. So all of these projects, they started off as research projects in our lab, but now they've been like spun out. There are social enterprises and nonprofits and so on.
Very good.
So this interplay between field and lab experience is something that's very central to us at Microsoft Research India. So we wanted to kind of build on that. So recently we've started this Microsoft Sky Center, which is Microsoft Societal Impact through Cloud and AI Center. And these are collaborations with different organizations, where we look at projects across, education and urban sensing, mental health, and, designing public awareness campaigns and financial inclusion, so on. So, I am not directly involved with these projects, but if there's any interest to know more, I'm happy to, put you in touch with people who are leading these efforts.
Okay.
So one of the efforts at the Sky Center is Navana Tech. So Navana Tech is a social enterprise that designs text-free, voice-assisted technologies for low-literate smartphone users. So in a way, they are, executing or implementing the, design principles that, that we had with the text-free user interfaces work. So I'm currently an advisor at Navana Tech. The founders they were Cornell Tech MBA students who got seed funding in one of their university startup awards, but they are currently in our building at Bangalore, in Microsoft building. And they're currently developing various apps for organizations and, financial inclusion and social networking for farmers and AI-powered anthropometry for newborn and child health and, early pest warning system for low-literate cotton farmers and so on. So yeah, these are interfaces that are graphical, voice assisted. So they're doing quite well. One such future-facing project, which is close to the Sky Center, is Karya, where we explore crowdsourcing in low-resource settings. So the users here are people who are, from rural India, who have gotten education in local language, and they're relatively new to digital devices. So we built an Android application to measure the efficiency with which people are able to digitize handwritten, in this case, Marathi or Hindi words. So the tasks are based on the real world need for digitizing handwritten Devanagari scripts. There's lots of government documents which are handwritten and you need to digitize them. So can we use, rural individuals who are new to digital devices? Can we have them do this work and get paid for it? So it's crowdsourcing, but in a low resource context. And so we did a 2-week study where we saw that participants achieved about 97% accuracy in digitizing handwritten words and on these low-end smartphones, and a crowdsourcing platform that employs them, performed comparably to a professional transcription firm. And participants were so enthusiastic to use this application that we had to actually kind of impose restrictions, because sometimes they would like forego lunch during the day, or not sleep at night, because they want to really do this digitization work and get paid for it, because there's a lot
Interesting.
of
I
like
see. So yeah,
aspiration to do
yes,
digital work in
right.
rural India.
Hmm.
People like
It's a new job
farmers.
opportunity sort of a thing, even,
Right. Exactly.
yeah, so
Yeah.
different thing to do and interesting, I think. I mean,
Yeah.
maybe one thing it's probably interesting is that probably the proliferation of both TV and mobile phone,
Yeah.
in a everywhere, including rural India, of course, that allows people to see what you can do with technology,
Yes. Yes.
possibilities, and that
Definitely.
gives them the
Mhm.
thinking that, oh, I can do something more with this sort of a.
Yes.
So maybe
Totally.
the
Totally.
intimidation that you saw like say 10, 15 years back, and now is
It's
probably
not.
quite different, right? So that would be
Yeah.
my.
Especially for younger people. Yeah.
Exactly, that's what I was
Yeah.
thinking. Yeah.
Yeah.
Right.
It's because I think especially among younger individuals from these communities
Hmm.
who have some education, let's say in a local language, there
Hmm.
is a lot of aspiration to become a part of the digital economy. So I've spoken to farmers' children who say that they don't want to do farming work because it's so much hard labor, but they aspire to do like computer related work. So I think that aspiration is there, and you're also getting paid for it. So yeah, I think all those things coming together. So yeah.
That's very
So yeah.
interesting. Hmm.
So some common themes. We So this is a system where we tried looking at how people do, sharing of entertainment videos. So this was some years back, where we saw that there's this entire economy around sharing videos. So you can walk into, I think many of you would know, you can walk into a store and you can get for like uh, 200 rupees, you can get like 1 gig of data. So
Hmm.
and then like that data consists of movie songs or like videos, funny clips. And then we saw that people would sometimes like take that video or whatever media that they have and transfer it to the video of the phone of a friend or a family member using 19 complicated steps. So I mean, so strong was their motivation that, it would help them, get over usability challenges. Now, to make a phone call, is like a few steps, if you don't use, if you use the phone book, right? So that's
Hmm.
for like simple functions, they're like a few steps. For this complex interaction, you have to do 19 steps. And people from low income, low literate communities were still doing it because so strong was their motivation to, for entertainment, to watch these videos. So they were
Ah,
doing
yeah.
this sharing,
Hmm.
and these were typically younger members of the community. As you can see from the pictures, younger male members. So we plotted this network graph, and we saw that the network graph comprises of users and mobile shop owners and content distributors. At that time, only the yellow nodes were people who had internet connection. So this is largely an offline system, and the transfer is over Bluetooth. That
Hmm.
time there was like
Hmm.
no internet on these phones, and this is like a Bluetooth transfer that they're doing using 19 complicated steps. But the lesson that we learned here is where there's a will, there's a way. Basically, if you have the right motivation, um, you it can help you trump usability challenges. Um, okay, so one thing that we learned was that you know uh, when you're testing your technology, especially in the context that I've been talking about, people might say that they'll use your technology because they don't want to offend you. They'll say that, like, if you take a technology to the field, they might say that, oh yeah, I'll use it, but they might eventually not use it. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
so
Mm-hmm.
um, these people do this because they don't want to offend you. It's known as participant response bias in human-computer interaction, and we studied this systematically. So what we did was that we showed users two identical videos on two identical phones, and we said that we were working on the video quality of one of those videos. Mind you, it's like the same video onto phones which are
Okay.
exactly the same.
Mm-hmm.
And we're telling people that we're working on the video quality of one of those videos. And through 450 interviews in urban Bangalore, we saw that respondents were 2.5 times more likely to prefer the artifact which they thought was developed by the interviewer, even when the alternative is identical.
I see.
And
Okay.
and when the interviewer is a foreign researcher requiring a translator, this is an former intern, the bias towards the interviewer's artifact increases to 5x. So this is a way to show that participant response bias like really exists, and we should be careful of how we evaluate the systems that we design. So
Very, very
you know
interesting. The bias in any kind of
yeah.
a survey is, is important thing to take into account to,
Mhm.
to kind of calibrate what you get. But for
Right.
this sort of HCI type thing, it is even more so. And the example of foreign researcher, so,
Yeah, exactly. I mean, and like of a
so,
certain race, right? Yeah. I
mhm,
think the thing is, yeah, I mean, therefore, I mean, it's we have to be careful about how we do our evaluations, not just do like qualitative evaluations, but maybe like give usability tasks and see
mhm,
how people are, do more like objective evaluations in addition to qualitative interviews. What do you think and how would you
mhm,
use this? I think it's important to do those kind of uh, uh, quantitative evaluations as
mhm.
well. So how do you do like triangulation? So that's something we learned. So I would say that when we're designing technologies for people like us, we might have good intuitions, but when we're designing for people who are very different from us, I think we've understood that it's very important to do field immersion, spend a lot of time in the community, and especially during evaluations. Basically when the rubber meets the road,
Mhm.
it's many interventions can fall flat, and experience challenges that we had not even considered. And so I think it's very, very important to do field immersion and iterative prototyping, and keep the end user at the center of the design process, and do like human-centered design, and follow them up with rigorous evaluations if we want to have uh, meaningful impact, using technological interventions in these communities. So with that, thank you so much for your attention. I don't know how we're doing on time, but
This great timing
yes.
is fantastic, right
Okay. Okay,
about
cool.
55 minutes or so.
Oh, wow. Okay, I'm glad.
Yeah,
Thank
very good. So I think it is excellent. I got a couple of questions, and before I open it, anybody want to unmute and ask question also. The one thing is that, do you sense that when you go reach to these communities to do your initial kind of attempt to do it, do you feel like some communities are suspicious
Mm, mm,
or
mm, mm.
personal, that they said, well, they're trying to steal some, not steal, but get something
Mm,
from me, that's why they're coming? What is their
mm.
interest, rather?
Interest,
Yeah,
yes.
so
Mhm.
so what's your experience in that regard, I guess?
No, that is an excellent question. I think in India, we see that people are usually, like, at least in my experience, people have been very like welcoming. There's a lot of hospitality. Having said that, I think we've seen that it's very, very important to go through trusted intermediary organizations who have
Aha.
already been working in these communities for a long time. So
Right.
we have partners that we work with, nonprofit organizations in a lot of cases who have been working in these communities. So that way, I think it's easier for people to, accept you and open up to you. So yes,
Hmm.
intermediaries are very important. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. That's very, very interesting. Any other insights you want to share from your experience? Anecdotal rather, maybe.
Mm,
That
yeah.
you have seen, or what
Actually,
you have seen things changing over time from when you first started.
was started. So I think one thing that I want to share, and you must have seen a picture of this. So a group of older people who are like using this application. We see that like in the Western context, technologies are designed for individual scenarios. It's
Mm-hmm.
like one person using one device.
Mm-hmm.
But in our communities, we see that collaborative usage scenarios are very encouraging. When people are in a group, like
Mm-hmm.
around a kiosk,
Mm-hmm.
people are more confident, like learning from each other, watching over each other's shoulders, kind of like suggesting things to one another. So I feel like maybe it's a function of being like a collectivistic culture,
Mm-hmm.
where it's like so much strong sense of community. But I feel like there's a lot of opportunity for um, you know uh, organizations to explore this like collaborative usage scenarios where it's a group of people interacting with the technology. That way you can kind of multiply the value of the technology by like the number of people who are using it. So yeah, because in the Western context, it's such individual usage scenarios. So
I
yeah,
see.
that's something that has stood out for us. And like we saw intermediation and things like that. So yeah,
The
I
other
don't know
question,
if that answers your
no, that's
question.
that's very good. But then I have a kind of a follow-up question to that.
Yeah.
Because you talked about doing it in South Africa and Philippines, what
Mm,
difference did you
mm,
see in the same kind of a thing about the collaborative aspect, or anything
collaborative.
that you want to
Mm,
share?
yeah. So um, so there are similarities and differences, I would say. I think in India, I have like at least when we were doing the field work, people were more kind of like open about, okay, come into our homes and talk to us. So I feel like sometimes in some of the communities in South Africa, it was very important to go through an intermediary organization, because I
I
mean,
see. Uh-huh.
maybe people were not trusted as much.
Mm-hmm.
Having said that, uh, there was maybe there was like more knowledge of English in some of these communities. So
Mm-hmm.
so I would say there's like lots of interesting similarities and differences. But
Okay.
one thing that constantly stands out for me is that when you go to like rural homes, people, like, even if they don't have much money, they want to like feed you, and there's extreme amounts of
Right, right,
hospitality, and like
right.
they'll like
Mm-hmm.
feed you dal bati in in Madhya Pradesh, like
Mm-hmm.
make it from scratch. So there's a lot of, at least in field work in India, I feel like there's a lot of like openness, and desire to kind of engage. Yeah.
Great. Thank you.
Mm.
Let me see if
Thank you.
anybody from the participants have any other question. You can unmute and ask any questions you have. Anybody have any other questions? If not, we're going to wrap it up here today. So,
Um, I have a question.
okay, go
Yeah.
ahead.
It was an excellent talk. Uh,
Thank you.
I really enjoyed that from start to the end. Um,
Thank you so
so
much.
during the talk, you have said that most of the apps are targeted to the low literate people or elderly people, right? So my concern is how Microsoft is handling the cybersecurity, because these days we see that a lot of case happening uh, regarding the cybersecurity with mostly I assume that mostly the victims are low literate or the elderly. So how
Mm-hmm.
Microsoft is also taking care of this side?
Mm. No, that's a great question. Actually, I should like please send me an email. I'll put you in touch with our security researchers, and they'll be in a better position to answer this question. But it's a great question. Yes, you're absolutely right. There's people who are low literate, like sometimes they won't even like use passwords on their phone because they tend to forget these passwords, and or they'll share the password with intermediary users. So I think these are very interesting it's a very interesting question, and yes, I don't feel qualified to answer this question, but I am happy to put you in touch with. Please send me
Thank
an
you.
email. I'm happy to put you in touch with security researchers in our lab.
Sure.
Yeah,
Okay. Thank you.
thank you.
Great. Any other questions? If not, I want to thank you, Indrani, for a
Thank you.
really excellent talk, obviously, but more
Thank you.
importantly, an important domain of problem that you're looking into to help the
Thank you so much.
low literate people. This is really really has a huge social implications, and I think benefit to the society in general. So I thank you for your time and sharing your
Thank you so
knowledge
much.
and what you have learned. So
Thank you so much, Deepta. Thank you again for the opportunity. I really had a lot of fun doing this, and yeah, great questions from everyone. So thank you so much. Yeah, thank you.